Magic the Gathering is a uniquely complicated card game with its 30-year history, over 27,000 unique designs, as well as the feature creep that's happened over the years of its design. You obviously can't go 30 years without creating some level of incredible complexity. However, complexity was baked into the game even from its very beginning, with the introduction of cards known as interrupts, later called instants, which allow you to take actions in the middle of your opponent's actions. Your opponent tries to summon out a creature to fight you with, well, that's too bad, it's getting interrupted. Speaking with judges and other players, you'll learn about uniquely complicated aspects baked into the very rules of Magic, such as the stack, which is the order in which spells both are played and then resolved. Effectively, think first in, last out. And then there's layering, a feature of the game that even people who have come to successfully understand the stack may not quite understand, with unique timing rules for how things layer on top of one another to affect the state of a current onboard card. A comment I frequently like to make about Magic the Gathering is that one of the most uniquely powerful effects you could have in Magic the Gathering is simple pedantry, understanding the rules and then arguing endlessly about, no, this is technically how the rules work, by the rules as written. This has actually become a problem for the game throughout the years, up including the point where Lorwyn, a fantasy cartoon universe that was trying to have absolutely no or minimal violence, introduced a whole level of complexity that players absolutely could not understand and led to the creation of what was known as the New World Order. You know what, actually, if you're interested in finding out about the complexity of Lorwyn, Spice 8 Rack has made an excellent video where it goes over the sort of unique fucking mess that was Lorwyn's board state in the latter half of the video. You may be surprised to learn then that after all this New World Order, interrupts, the stack, layering, all of that, that one of the most uniquely complicated cards in Magic the Gathering actually comes from a relatively new tribute set, or what's known as a Universes Beyond set, where Magic the Gathering makes tribute to an external property. In this case, it's Lord of the Rings. In order to understand the card in question, we have to travel back in time a little bit to 2014, when a unique supplemental set known as Conspiracy was created. Conspiracy was a supplemental draft set, so this was sort of a side game to Magic the Gathering, where you're meant to open up packs of cards to build your deck at random. It introduced a lot of mechanics specific to the draft itself, but also introduced a fairly interesting and unique mechanic known as the Will of the Council. The Will of the Council saw all players voting on what the outcome of the card you played would be from between 2 and 3 different abilities. Split Decision is a card from Conspiracy that could either be a counterspell or copy a spell, depending on how players voted. It's interesting to keep in mind that this design was created after Lorwyn, when the developers looked back at the game and said, okay, Lorwyn's made this game way too complicated, the board state is way too crazy, we need to bring in that level of complexity a bit. However, what they allowed themselves to do, it seemed, was to, in supplemental products, create more and more complexity, create more interesting and unique mechanics that, within the core set, might make the game a bit too complicated. But talking about Will of the Council, over time, Wizards of the Coast design team has been more willing to innovate and change things up over time, increasing the complexity of the game. And that is where we get to the Lord of the Rings set and its newest, most interesting iteration of the Will of the Council, the Secret Council, and my favorite card in the entire set, Sir Dan the Shipwright. The history of democracy is really interesting, but one of the things that we've sort of learned throughout the history of democracy is that it's important for individuals to feel safe and secure within their votes. Everybody has to know that, first off, their vote kind of matters, and second off, that they're not going to receive any level of harsh criticism for their votes, otherwise intimidation becomes entirely possible. And Sir Dan the Shipwright fixes democracy. Alright, so who is this man that I'm claiming can save democracy for all of us? Well, Sir Dan is a legendary creature from the Lord of the Rings, Tales of Middle-earth, specifically from its commander's set. Sir Dan costs 1 blue, 1 green, and 3. He is an elvish noble. He has 3 power, 4 toughness, and vigilance. He also has an interesting twist on the will of the council. He has the Secret Council. Whenever Sir Dan the Shipwright enters the battlefield or attacks, each player secretly votes for a player, then those votes are revealed. This is what I was talking about when it comes to the security involved in democracy. Everybody has to know that they're not going to be judged for whoever they voted for. That way they can secretly vote for, I don't know, Paris Hilton or Stormy Daniels. The interesting thing about Sir Dan is how he uses this mechanic, where other creatures will use the secret will of the council in order to have effects such as taking control of opponents' creatures or getting +1/+1 counters or similar things. The way Sir Dan uses it is to reward everyone in dynamic ways. You see, for each vote a player receives during his specific secret vote, that player will draw a card. If a player is so profoundly unpopular that they receive no votes whatsoever, they get to put a free card from their hand into play. This introduces such a complicated interaction, incredibly complicated singular interaction, that this can literally not be solved, and this introduces us to a major philosophical problem that we're going to call, is called, the prisoner's dilemma. So, what is the prisoner's dilemma? Well, according to Google, the prisoner's dilemma is a game theory thought experiment that involves 2 rational agents, each of whom can cooperate for mutual benefit or betray the partner for individual higher rewards. So, take for instance 2 co-conspirators. They're both accused of a crime. If one confesses and the other does not, the one who confesses will immediately be released, and the other will spend 20 years in prison. If neither confesses, each will only be held for a few months. And if both confess, each will be jailed for 15 years. Thank you, Britannica.com, for the simple example there. Now, I understand that the circumstances in thought experiment don't exactly line up here, because in the thought experiment, we assume 2 rational actors, and as anybody can tell you, assuming Magic the Gathering players are rational actors is a bit silly. Now, the basic Prisoner's Dilemma thought experiment, while also assuming there are only 2 actors involved, also assumes there's only 2 possible options or outcomes. And I know on Sir Dan's card, it might look much the same. You either vote for someone or you do not. However, there's a lot of factors that go into whether or not you should make any given decision. You see, with Sir Dan, there are at least 4 options given each time you vote. The vote being, you have 4 different players. Also, you're not just deciding who gets to draw 1 card, but who doesn't, and who doesn't get to play a free card. Now, you don't absolutely get to decide who doesn't get to play the free card, but that's the state of democracy itself. Speaking to a wider problem, one of the issues with democracy itself is that everybody seems to sort of assume that when people say your voice matters, that means that you should have absolute authority over any given action, even though you're in a pool of hundreds, thousands, millions of people, or even in a simple pot of 4. Voting is rarely, if ever, so straightforward. For instance, just take Magic the Gathering and Serdan. Are you voting for somebody to draw a card, which you might actually be doing, or are you voting for them to not get a free thing? And if you don't vote for them, are you voting for them to get the free thing? For instance, if I say that Jimmy gets to draw a card, that leaves Tom and Tammy both available to play a free card from their hand because I didn't vote for them. Now, I can sort of make the logical assumption that not everybody's going to vote for Jimmy, but I don't know that. Everybody's vote is done in secret. So, am I voting for Jimmy to draw a card, or am I voting for Tommy and Tammy to play a card? And I mean, in this instance, I guess I'm also voting for myself to play a free card here. I could just always vote for me, but then I'm letting all three of my opponents, if they're not sensible, play free things. And do I want them to play free things? That doesn't sound wise. So you might move into threat assessment to say, okay, I need to vote for somebody to do something. I'm going to vote based on my unique threat assessment abilities, because I'm very good at threat assessment. I'm always very good at assessing a threat. So how do you assess who to vote for in the case of Serdan? This is voting for them to draw a card, because that's what the words on the card say. So what I have to take into account is how many cards are in their deck, because if they're only at 4 cards in their deck, well, that singular vote can nearly mill them out. I have to look at the number of creatures they have on board, what creatures they have on board. For instance, if I'm letting Jimmy's got 1 card in hand, and I know it's a Craterhoof Behemoth, well, guess what I'm going to do? I'm not going to vote for Jimmy with Serdan, because I can spoil his Craterhoof attempt for a later turn. Absolutely fantastic. I know it gives him a free Craterhoof, however, it keeps him from Craterhoofing on his own turn. Maybe I want to vote for myself because I want that delicious, delicious card draw. But again, if I do that, then all 3 of my opponents are getting a free thing. And again, them getting free things isn't necessarily great. Perhaps I'm going to vote for the player with the worst commander in play. I'm going to vote for somebody who has like a funny jank deck, or maybe I'm going to vote for the group hug player because the group hug players tend to have an excess of resources that they can funnel into playing their group hug cards, especially if I know that this player is a gimmicky group hug commander who specifically focuses all of their abilities on playing cards that will help everybody. The complication and assessment of Serdan the Shipwright is, I believe personally, beyond the complexity of any other card in the game. This is a masterclass. This card itself is practically a thesis on game theory, and specifically on the prisoner's dilemma. Alright, but hopefully I didn't ramble too much. I absolutely love Serdan. He's probably going to end up as my next deck. I know I was talking about trying to do deck videos for Magic the Gathering and specifically talking about the sorts of decks that I like to make, but as you noticed, it's been a little bit, and I've changed rooms because I've moved and life is complicated. However, I want y'all to let me know, what do you think of Serdan? What do you think? Is there a more complicated card than Serdan in Magic the Gathering? And what do you think of his unique complexity? Also, go ahead and let me know your vote. Do you like this video or not? Hopefully, if you and the person across from you both vote for liking this video, it will go viral and everybody will see it. And if not, if you nor the other person across from you vote to like this video, you'll all go to jail for 20 years.